In 1992, Sue Rodriguez brought the right to die debate center stage in Canada. Diagnosed with the fatal degenerative disease ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease, Rodriguez fought to change the law banning assisted suicide. When the Supreme Court disagreed, she committed suicide with the help of an anonymous doctor. It's been 15 years since her death, but the debate rages on. Today, Bill C-384 may be picking up where Rodriguez left off. Known as the Right to Die with Dignity Bill, it was introduced in May of this year by Bloc Québécois MP Francine Lalonde. Lalonde wants to amend the homicide provision in subsection 222 and the assisted suicide provision in section 241 of the Criminal Code. In her bill, a person can request to die if they meet the following criteria. They must be at least 18 years old, continue to experience severe physical or mental pain after trying or refusing appropriate treatment, suffer from a terminal illness, appear to be lucid, make 2 written requests more than 10 days apart stating their wish to die, and appoint in writing in front of 2 witnesses another person to act on their behalf if or when they are no longer lucid. 2 of the groups most concerned about this bill are the elderly and the disabled. Hugh Share is a human rights lawyer and the former chair of the Council of Canadians with Disabilities.
For the disability community, we have a community that's faced a tremendous history of exclusion and devaluation.
And that history, says Share, leads many non-disabled people to view life with a disability as one not worth living. And that societal attitude, combined with Lalonde's bill, is worrying, he says.
How many people have I heard say, if I'm ever in a wheelchair, kill me? We've seen numerous examples of that following the Robert Latner case with lots of different children whose parents either felt so isolated and desperate that they felt they had no alternative but to take the child's life, or alternatively felt that it was appropriate and a valuable, worthwhile thing to do.
Sound a bit far-fetched? Well, according to Share, data taken from the Netherlands where euthanasia is legal showed that abuses do happen despite the safeguards.
The reality is the Remling report found, and it's been further found 4 years ago, that 1,600 people, lives have been taken from them without those protocols being met.
This year in Belgium, researchers published a study which found that in 2007 in Flanders, Belgium, 1.9% of all deaths were the result of euthanasia, and in 1.8% of those deaths, lethal drugs were used without the patient's explicit consent. And although the pro-euthanasia lobby has failed to pass legislation so far, Share says they have succeeded in some ways.
First of all, we've seen a general weakening in the kind of principles that have historically maintained the prohibitions against euthanasia and assisted suicide. And of course, opinion polls in this country have showed an increasing level of support for some measure of assisted death, be it assisted suicide or some form of euthanasia.
Terminology, such as quality of life, also muddies the debate, he says.
I don't like the term quality of life. What does it mean to assess one's quality of life? And secondly, is it really even possible to do? It's always a moving target, number one. And number two, how I rate my quality of life is going to be different than how you rate my quality of life, potentially, and vice versa. And so, is it meaningful?
Anti-euthanasia activist Steve Passmore agrees with him. Passmore, who was born with cerebral palsy and is protesting the bill, says the language used doesn't reflect what's really being discussed.
Now, the other side that says that it's because of love and mercy and compassion. They say that it's an act of compassion to kill. What they're trying to do, because they know it won't fly any other way, they have to use words that don't belong together and keep, through repetition, putting it out there to the culture that it's a merciful thing. But if you keep hearing it and you associate mercy and love, then you think, oh, well, there's nothing wrong with that.
And while the terminology is important, Dr. Jean Haas is more concerned about the ethical and moral implications of Bill C-384.
Well, the moral implications are what is a life worth living, first of all, is to understand our lives and the quality of our lives. So is a person's life worth living if they're still undergoing pain and suffering of some sort, whether it's physical or mental?
Haas is a professor of religion and theology at Redeemer University College in Ancaster, Ontario. He says that for Christians, although it's a tough pill to swallow, suffering is an integral part of our faith.
So suffering, in one sense, is never a good thing. But what Scripture tells us is that God is at work in suffering. He's at work, He works good in the lives of individuals, and He works good in a broader sense.
Haas is also concerned about Canada's healthcare system and how Bill C-384 could change that.
Because the traditional Hippocratic oath was that the doctor would do no harm. But this changes the whole role of the doctor in your relationship to your doctor, because your doctor then is not there simply to treat the problem that you have. The doctor can also be an agent to help you end your life.
But the issue of suffering needlessly, from a terminal illness, for example, is a thorny one and doesn't sit well with most people. Haas says there are alternatives.
If you feel alone, if you feel like nobody cares for you, if you feel that you're bearing your suffering and your pain on your own, then I can understand why you might be tempted to end your life and to say, my life is not worth living. But if we are a caring society who says the priority is not to provide a way for people in suffering and pain to exit this society, but our priority should be to provide means for people to be cared for, even if people have a disease that can't be cured. Palliative care for them.
At Mount Sinai Hospital in Toronto, the Temmy Latner Centre for Palliative Care is one of Canada's premier end-of-life centres. Here, patients can find information, support, and doctors who can help them manage what can often be a difficult and painful time in their lives.
And he was one of the patients that said, please help me die.
Dr. Larry Librach is executive director.
We serve dying patients in the community, in hospital, and we also serve dying children and their families. We also have a children's center that looks after grieving children. On top of that, we're an academic center, so we do educational programs and research.
Palliative care in Canada began more than 30 years ago, thanks to the work of Dr. Balfour Mount. Its focus is to care for people near the end of life and deals largely with managing pain.
We use a lot of medications like morphine, and people have all these myths about morphine and that, but basically we're not trying to do people in with the drugs or to make them, you know, blotto or gaga or anything like that. But what we're trying to do is control the pain. We can control most pain, not totally. In many cases, but we can provide reasonably good relief.
According to Librach, only 20% of Canadians use palliative care, and that's largely because most just don't know about it, and because physicians don't like referring patients.
Sometimes our patients say we're a very well-kept secret. There's still that sort of, patients are in it and physicians are often in it for the cure, even though a lot of these diseases are not curable, and so people don't want to accept they're dying.
Librach, who's an award-winning palliative care doctor, says he's followed all three of Francine Lalonde's bills. So what does he think about Bill C-384?
It's a rotten bill. You could drive a truck through some of the provisions that she has outlined there, and I guess entitling the bill Dying with Dignity sort of grates me, because it's not necessarily dying with dignity. It may be for some people, but it takes away from the idea of good palliative care, so I think that the bill itself was terribly flawed.
Librach admits at some point Canadians will have to discuss euthanasia, but until all Canadians have access to palliative care, that's a conversation we can't entertain, he says.
We've got really great birthing in this country. If we can have dying that is equally looked after, people in nursing homes are terribly served by a system. They die often, we know, in pain, without support for their families. While that happens, we shouldn't legalize assisted suicide. We should guarantee that every Canadian has a right to access quality end-of-life care. And then for that very small number of people, we have to scratch our heads and say, can we do this? Do we want to as a society? Not by holding a referendum, but to really debate this. My worry is that once a bill goes in, you've got politicians making decisions, and I'm not sure, I hate to say this, that I trust politicians to make that kind of decision, because they haven't made any decisions about quality end-of-life care.
And the most important thing when it comes to end-of-life care options? Well, according to Dr. Librach, it's education.
go to the website of Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association, and there's a listing of palliative care programs. So that's an online resource. Another online resource is Canadian Virtual Hospice.
Bill C-384 is up for its second hour of debate on December 1st, with the vote taking place on December 2nd. To find out more about the bill and how you can voice your opinion, visit crossroads.ca and click on Euthanasia. In Toronto, Ontario, I'm Bridget Antwi for 100 Huntley Street.